So we'll continue with our discussion of the Unruh effect. Are there any questions from yesterday, from our discussion of the Unruh effect yesterday?
The note was not uploaded yesterday.
I did upload it. Maybe I uploaded it in the evening. I didn't upload it at 2 o'clock. I forgot I uploaded it maybe at 5 or something. Did you look after that? No. I have given the link. It's on my website. If you go to Subrat. There's a link called Courses, and then that it says Circ School, and then it's are you having any troubles downloading the notes? I don't know how many of you have tried. So you're being able to download. Okay, great. So good. So very good. So are there any other questions about yeah?
So when we wrote the vacuum of mana because of reading the so the motivation was that it could be a general linear function.
That's right.
So the answer was something like a Gaussian. There were only even more.
There were 2
B daggers.
Correct.
So
there were 2 B daggers.
So vacuum of one observer was related only to the even numbered modes of the other.
Correct. So that answer was enough for us to satisfy, this thing that we had.
Is there any illusion behind that?
Well, let's see. Let's see. Yes, the issue is that good. So luckily speaking, things which have one creation operator are like coherent states for the. So as we discussed earlier, things which have one creation operator are like coherent states. So if you had a situation where you had an equation which looked like A on the vacuum minus a constant that didn't have to do with the A daggers was 0, then you would get some of these linear terms. So if but that kind of thing is not that kind of the equations that you get are homogeneous equations. So things which have linear terms in the exponent generally appear when you have a inhomogeneous equation, when you have something that looks like A minus Z on omega is 0. Here we get something which looks like A minus Z into A dagger on omega is 0. So that's solved by a quadratic thing which doesn't have the linear terms. Okay, but by the way, in what I wrote yesterday, I missed a minus sign. Okay, I think I wrote minus beta alpha inverse, beta star alpha. I wrote beta alpha inverse, and you can check it. There should obviously be a minus beta alpha inverse. Because the equation with alpha c plus beta star is 0. And clearly the solution to that is C is beta star alpha inverse with a minus sign. I forgot to write. Somebody pointed out to me yesterday, so you can just check. Some obvious minus sign. Okay, good. So where were we yesterday? Let me just try and say what we are going to do today. So today I want to complete our discussion of the Unruh effect, and then I want to go on. I want to describe some physics of the Unruh effect. And then I want to use the Unruh effect to come up with a derivation of Hawking radiation and the fact that, for an outside observer, a Schwarzschild observer outside the black hole looks like it's in a thermal state. Okay, so today we are going to do a derivation of Hawking radiation. However, because I think Hawking radiation is an important topic, I thought I'll focus more on it because it's something that will also be broadly applicable. So I'm going to actually then also start going through Hawking's original derivation of Hawking radiation, which didn't rely on the Unruh effect, but relied on a geometric optics approximation, which I'll explain. And then actually tomorrow I wanted to give you a third derivation of Hawking radiation that has the property that it's more precise than both of the derivations I'm going to give you today and half of tomorrow, which is in terms of correlation functions, which also makes precise what the limitations of these derivations are. So in fact, I thought that today and tomorrow I'll basically do derivation of Hawking radiation, and then we'll do the information paradox in the last 2 lectures. So I'm just trying to reorient things a little bit to try and give you information that will be more broadly useful as well. But we will cover the information paradox, but a little faster in the last 2 lectures. So slightly modified plan of lectures. Okay, so let me just tell you where we were yesterday. You see, when we were yesterday, we had these 2 expansions, right? Let me just remind you. We have these 2 expansions. and this was the Rindler expansion. So these UR and VL are the modes we discussed yesterday. Right? These are the modes which go like, which go like e to the I omega UR, where UR is the Rindler term, either in the left quadrant or in the right quadrant. So these are the things I wrote down at the end of last class. You should have them all in your notes. Okay. Then there was another expansion, which is okay, and this was the Minkowski expansion. And now the question is, if I start with the Minkowski, what is the Bogoliubov coefficient between these A, B, A tilde, B tilde, and the C's and the D's? Okay. So you can write down a complete expansion for the field in either of these modes, and the question is, what is the Bogoliubov coefficient? Actually, this question turns out to be a slightly hard question, but the Unruh effect is a statement that you can write the Minkowski vacuum in terms of an excited state in the Rindler vacuum by using a trick without finding the full Bogoliubov coefficients. Okay, so we are going to find the Minkowski vacuum in terms of the Rindler vacuum. We're going to find omega m, okay, in terms of omega Rindler. Omega m is the Minkowski vacuum in terms of omega Rindler. Without finding the full Bogoliubov coefficients between the A tilde B tilde. So that's the trick due to Unruh. And that trick goes as follows. Okay. So consider, I'm going to introduce a third mode. I know there's some confusion about these ULs and URs. I'm going to introduce a UU, which is the third mode, which is the following. Okay. So let me just try and tell you what the physics motivation behind this trick is. You see, if you want to find the relation between the two vacua, you don't necessarily have to find the full Bogoliubov transformations between these ABs and these Cs and Ds. That's because what Unruh pointed out was that you could consider a different set of modes, okay, which is a third expansion, neither this nor this, but a third expansion, which, however, has the property that the positive energy modes of that Unruh expansion go into positive energy modes of the Minkowski expansion, okay, and negative energy modes of the Unruh field expansion go into negative energy modes of the Minkowski mode expansion. So then, if you can find the Bogoliubov transformations between the Rindler and the Unruh expansions, okay, then what you know is that the Minkowski vacuum is the same as the Unruh vacuum. And then, if you can find the relation for the Unruh vacuum and the Rindler vacuum, then that tells you that you've also found out the relation between the Minkowski vacuum and the Rindler vacuum. Okay, so is this logic clear? It will become clear as we go along. But basically, the idea is to find the third expansion, which has the property that the vacuum of that third expansion coincides with the Minkowski vacuum. Okay? And then, if you can find the Bogoliubov coefficients between that third expansion and the Rindler modes, then that is enough to tell you the relationship between these two vacua. Not tell you the full Bogoliubov coefficients, but enough to tell you the relationships between these two vacua. So that's what we are going to do. Okay? So consider these modes, these are the Unruh modes, and they have the following property. Okay. So remember, these UL stars are functions of this UR, which is the Rindler, U Rindler, and someone said I should use small r. Okay. So these modes have the property that they are, the left and right modes have the property that they had some value here and they were zero in the other half. These modes have the property that they are non-zero in both halves, but they have this property that they look like the conjugate of this mode here, and they look like e to the pi omega into ur of this mode here. Okay. Can I ask you, in terms of the Minkowski u variable, in terms of the Minkowski capital U variable, what is this mode in the left quadrant? let me give this as an in-class question, which is the following. UU, okay, of the Minkowski U, which is the capital, there are lots of U's here, so try not to get confused between them. In terms of the Minkowski U, is equal to what? Okay. So, why don't you look back in your notes and just take a minute, and then you can, if you can write the answer and hold it up, that will be great. I'll get a sense of, how many of you are following. So you know what these ULs are, right, from your notes? You know what they are in terms of U-Rindler. And you know what U-Rindler is in terms of the capital U Minkowski. So what is UU in terms of U Minkowski? If you just tell me the answer in region 1, forget about the answer in region 3. Just tell me what it is in region 1. Sorry, I'm sorry. One second. Before you do this, sorry. I think I've used different conventions in my notes. This is U left and U right. U left makes sense only in 3, and U right makes sense only in 1. Sorry. Yeah, with this. Okay, do most of you have the answer, or some of you have the answer? Do some of you have the answer for this? Right. But what is it in terms of U Minkowski? U Minkowski was, related by capital X minus capital T. Remember what U Minkowski was? Okay, do some of you have the answer? Have you? Okay, I'll tell you what the answer is. It's this. You see, UL. Remember this guy looks like E. You see, this has a form which looks like E to the I omega into UR. Right? So this is E to the minus I omega UR. Right? But what is A? Now what is E to the UR? Remember, what is the relationship between U and A? Between capital U and small u. So this mode looks like U to the plus I omega by T. Because remember, we defined capital U to be E to the minus AUR. Right? Okay. So remember that we defined capital U in region 3. In region 3, where capital U was positive, remember we defined U to be E to the minus AUR. Okay. So therefore, this mode which looks like E to the minus I omega UR looks like capital U to the I omega by. There's what?
So capital U is equal to minus.
You have to be careful of which notation, which region you're doing it. In region 3, capital U is positive and there's no minus sign here. Okay, in region 1 it's negative, and we'll come to that in a second. Okay? Okay, so this mode looks like this in region 3. Okay, now what does it look like in region 1? You see, the thing is that I can take this mode U to the I omega by A, okay, and now this mode is not an analytic function on the full complex plane. Right? It's not an analytic function on the full complex plane because it has branch cuts. Now you have a choice of where to choose the branch cut. You see, where you choose the branch cut tells you which function you're using. So this function, if I just write U to the I omega by A, that's not a well-defined function on the full plane. And you have to tell you where to choose the branch cut. I am now going to take this U to the I omega by A function and take the branch cut to be in the upper half plane. Okay? So take Then, if you take the branch cut to be in the upper half plane, then what happens is you take U to minus U in that function U to the I omega by A.
So is it less moving?
Right now I'm just saying something about complex functions. these are right movers, but I'm just saying something about complex functions. You see, if I take this function u to the I omega by a, and I take the branch cut of this function to be in the upper half plane, right? Then what happens? You see, I have a function here. This is the u plane, capital U plane. I've chosen the branch cut to be somewhere here, and u equal to 0. Doesn't matter where. Now, as I choose, I'm going to take this u and I'm going to continue it to minus u. As I do that, you see what happens is, as you give it a small negative part, as you take u to the e to the minus I theta, okay, this term, continues analytically, because in the lower half plane it's analytic. So u to the I omega by a goes to u to the e to the theta plus theta omega by a. So if I use this description where I've chosen the branch cut to be in the upper half plane to take u to e to the minus I phi, okay, so this function, if I take this function which has a branch cut in the upper half plane, then under this prescription you see that minus u to the I omega by a is equal to e to the pi omega by a into mod of u to the I omega by a. Right?
So can you repeat it? We have taken a branch cut anywhere in the upper half plane.
That's right. So I've taken the branch cut to be in the upper half plane.
Yeah.
Therefore, as you take u to minus u, you will pick up a factor of e to the pi omega by a.
The Minkowski u.
As I take the Minkowski u to minus u. Okay. Therefore, this function, this ur of ur, you can now check is e to the I is again e to the minus I omega ur, okay, which is what that mod of u to the power I omega by a. So you can see that this whole function can be written as e to the I omega by a with the branch cut chosen in the upper half plane with this choice here. So the whole function, this mode u looks like e to the I omega by a. It just looks like e to the I omega by a. But saying that it looks like e to the I omega by a is not good enough. You have to tell me, you have to specify e to the I omega by a correctly. And I'm specifying e to the I omega by a by saying that it's analytic in the lower half plane, but not necessarily in the upper half plane. So this mode is just e to the I omega by a. This combination is just e to the I u to the I omega by a. Okay. Similarly, you can choose a different mode. Right. You can choose this mode u tilde u. Which looks like ul of ur. Okay, so this is a mode which looks like ul in 3, but looks like ur star with e to the minus pi omega by a. Okay. This is a function which looks like u to the minus I omega by a, okay, with a minus sign now, okay. But again with branch cut. Okay, this is good. Now because as u to the minus I omega, as you continue it, you get e to the minus pi omega instead of e to the plus pi omega. What would have happened, by the way, if I chose the branch cut in the lower half plane? If I want to write down u to the minus I omega by a, the same function, but with the branch cut in the lower half plane, what changes in this? this sign changes. Okay. So this sign changes. You see, when I got this e to the minus pi omega, you can write minus 1 as e to the minus I pi, or you can write it as e to the plus I pi. Okay. Minus 1 can be written as e to the minus I pi or as e to the plus I pi. Okay, this is a fact. So when I say that u to the minus I omega by a continues to e to the minus pi omega by a into some number, into whatever the absolute value is, that is the statement that, you're writing minus 1 as e to the minus I pi, which is the correct thing to do because you're analytically continuing through the lower half plane. If you choose the branch cut to be in the lower half plane, then you can't analytically continue through the lower half plane, you have to analytically continue through the upper half plane. If you do that, then you would get a plus sign here and a minus sign there. So there are choices you can make for where the branch cut is. Those choices control how the function analytically continues from positive to negative u. And with one choice of branch cut you get e to the minus pi omega, with another choice you get e to the plus pi omega. Okay, good. So now, what's the advantage of defining these complicated modes, and why are we paying so much attention to whether they're analytic in the lower and the upper half plane? The reason is the following. Let me take this UU. Let me take this u e to the I omega by a. Let me take this u, that function there. This I can now write as a function of capital T and capital X, right? Because I wrote it as a function of u, so that I can write it also as a function of capital T and capital X, where capital T and capital X are the Minkowski things. Remember, u is equal to T minus X. So I can write this as a function of capital T and capital X, which are Minkowski coordinates. Now I do this integral. There is a frequency here, but let's say I do some I omega. Okay. What is this integral? You see, if you do this integral, you know there's something nice about this function. This function has the property that it can be continued analytically in the lower half plane. Right? That means that this contour integral which you're doing from minus infinity to plus infinity, there's some complicated function, right? You're trying to integrate this function with e to the minus I omega t from minus infinity to plus infinity. You might have thought that that's a very complicated answer, but in fact you can deform this contour to being something like this, right? Because everything is completely analytic in the lower half plane. Remember, you chose this capital U to be analytic in the lower half plane. That was the point we made. The branch cut is in the upper half plane. And of course, this e to the minus I omega t continues very nicely into the lower half plane. When there's a minus sign here, provided omega prime is larger than 0. Okay? Then this just gives you something which is exponentially dying. So this function is also analytic in the lower half plane. So this whole thing is analytic in the lower half plane, and at infinity it vanishes because this vanishes exponentially. Right?
Is it exponential minus omega t or I omega t?
It's minus I omega t. I omega prime here.
It's oscillating.
With what?
It does not decay.
It decays as you take t to be in the lower half plane. Okay? As you take t to be in the lower half plane, it decays. If you give t a negative imaginary part, then it decays. Okay? So this is something which continues well in the lower half. Is this clear? Okay. Therefore, this integral, which you can evaluate basically by taking things very far and then continuing to a lower half, is 0. So this integral is actually 0. Is this clear? Because this function is analytic in the lower half plane. So when you do this integral, this part doesn't give you any additional contribution. Because the moment you add even a small minus negative imaginary part, this goes off to 0. And then you see that this answer is just 0. So you see that these functions with the branch cut chosen in a particular way have the property that this into e to the minus I omega t is 0. This means in particular that they can be written themselves as a sum of only negative frequencies. For any positive omega prime, this answer is 0. Of course, if you took a negative omega prime, then the answer is not 0. So if you change the sign there, then the answer is not 0, because then you can't continue this in the lower half plane. Right? So this tells you the fact that this is 0 tells you that UU of Ex in itself be written as some complicated function. You don't even know what that is. Okay? Some chi omega into e to the minus I omega t. Okay. But where this function runs only from 0 to infinity. Okay? So this u is a function in this notion of positive of only positive frequency modes. It can be written only as a sum of e to the minus I omega t with omega positive. This will do both. Okay. So whatever it is, whatever the modes that multiply this are, this is a linear combination of all the positive frequency Minkowski modes.
So this integral tells me that U2 has no
term which looks like e to the plus I omega t.
There's no positive negative frequency.
Right. Positive, negative, some convention different, but yeah, in this convention, right. It has no term that looks like e to the plus I omega t. It has terms that look only like e to the minus I omega t. Therefore, this is a combination of the Minkowski modes, but only the Minkowski modes that have this property, that go like e to the minus I omega t. So, whatever the modes that multiply this are a combination of the positive frequency Minkowski modes. Similarly, you can show that this UU tilde that we defined, I defined in the erase, but you have in your notes, this also has the same property. Where this chi tilde is some different function, but it still has the property that it's composed only of positive frequency modes.
With positive frequency modes, the integral was 0.
That's right. So if you had an e to the plus I omega t, it tells you there is no e to the plus I omega t term here. If this integral with e to the minus I omega t 0, it tells you that this guy itself can be written as e to the minus I omega t. The Fourier transform gives you an omega minus omega. So I'm seeing some blank faces. I'm not saying something very complicated. I'm just saying that you've defined a function with some analytic properties, and then we've used those analytic properties to argue that a certain contour integral is 0, which has led us to this conclusion. Okay, which means that these modes can be written u and u tilde can be written in terms of only positive frequency modes of the Minkowski vacuum.
But if you had taken the branch cut in the lower half plane, then this would have meant that it is
Correct.
composed of positive frequency, negative frequency.
That's right. If I had taken the branch cut in the lower half plane, it would have meant that. That's right. But I have not. I've taken the branch cut here. So I want, and the fact that the branch cut is there tells me that it's an e to the plus phi omega.
Yeah.
If I took the other side, I'm getting e to the minus phi omega. So there's there are two different functions with the branch cut in the different plane. They behave differently in region 1, region 3. Okay. Any other questions? If you want to, this is in the notes as well, but if you see Birol and Davies, for example, it will explain it. This is the standard, it's the Unruh effect. So if something standard, you will see this.
Where?
It's called the Unruh effect. There's a section called the Unruh effect.
But that does not use this approach.
It will use this approach.
At least not in chapter 3rd.
I don't know which chapter, but it does have this approach. You can check it. It does have this approach. It's a standard thing. It's called the Unruh effect. This branch cut analysis and so on is something standard. Okay, but anyway, if there are any questions, it's something simple. So don't get scared. It's just some simple complex analysis. They're not doing anything very complicated. Are there any questions about this? I'm happy to answer questions.
In fact, it should be just omega should be less. The omega prime minus omega should be positive or something like that. That's the essential condition.
You don't need, there is an omega here, but I've suppressed that. I don't care about that. It's just omega prime greater than 0. You don't need omega.
Yeah, no, if I'm resubstituting this back,
Resubstituting what back?
this u of u inside
This?
the top, yeah.
This follows from this.
No, he's saying if we put that back, it will give omega minus omega prime is greater than 0 or something like that.
No, this is an integral from 0 to infinity over all omega. So there's no notion of omega minus. This is true. This is a statement which is true for all omega prime positive. Therefore, this is an integral which has support over all positive omega. Okay. Any such integral, if you substitute back, will satisfy this relation. The solution to this condition is this. The most general function u that satisfies this condition for all omega positive is this. Does everyone see this? It's just okay, good. So now, therefore, now we are going to introduce some more modes. Okay, so we had already these A tildes, B tildes, and C's and D's. Now I'm going to introduce the E's and E tildes and the F's and the F tildes. But they're simple. Okay, so now there's another expansion which is called the Unruh expansion. What are these V's and V tildes? That's a tutorial question. It's totally analogous to what we defined. You should be able to define it in a few minutes if you understood the part of defining U's and U tildes. Please define these in the tutorial, so they have the same properties. Okay, that they have they have these same properties, that they are composed only of positive frequency. Okay, so you have to be careful of what you write as the function of dr. Choose the e to the pi omegas or minus pi omegas correctly. If you do this, it's not hard. It should be a few minutes exercise. You should be able to define this. Okay? So these V's and V tildes are defined to have the same property, and they're written only as a function of positive and negative. This expansion is the Unruh expansion. Okay? So now we have three expansions: the Unruh expansion, the Minkowski expansion, and the Rindler expansion. But we have something important. The fact that these relations are true, okay, the fact that these relations are true tells us the following. It tells us that if you look at the Minkowski vacuum, the Minkowski vacuum satisfies these relations. It also satisfies so the Unruh and the Minkowski expansions are different. These modes are not the Minkowski modes, but the person who's using the Unruh modes and the person who's using the Minkowski modes agree on the notion of the vacuum. And the reason they agree on the notion of the vacuum is because the positive frequency Unruh modes are a linear combination of only the positive frequency Minkowski modes. Okay, so the beta star in the Bogoliubov coefficients between the U's and the Minkowski modes is 0. So they agree on the notion of the vacuum. They may not agree on other things. They are using different modes to excite things. So the one particle state for one may look more complicated for the other person. But they agree on their notion of the Minkowski on the vacuum. So the Minkowski vacuum is also the Unruh vacuum. Okay. So now to find the Minkowski vacuum in terms of the Rindler modes, we should solve these equations. Okay, but what are EW and E tilde W and FW and F tilde W in terms of the Rindler modes? Okay. So you can check that it's not so hard. If you take these UUs and you just write down what I had, the expansion of the UUs, and then you match that with the expansion, the Rindler expansion that I had a few boards earlier, you'll find the following relations. Yeah. You'll find that A omega How do these results come? These results just come from taking this expansion, just taking this, writing UU in terms of the ULs and the URs. Okay, I told you what UU was in terms of ULs and URs. Just take that and match the coefficients of UL, collect the coefficients of UL. You'll get a coefficient of UL from here, and also from the summation conjugate terms. Okay? Just match the coefficients of UL and of UR, and you'll get that. Okay? So this, comes from matching the coefficients of UL and UR in this expansion. Is it clear how you would get this? It's just a question of substituting that and matching the coefficients of UL and UR and comparing it with the Rindler expansion we had some time back. It's a very simple exercise which I'm not doing because I've erased all those expansions. But if you look back to your notes, you'll see easily that you get this expression between. Okay? So now, what is EW? EW is something very simple. You can get it, you can write EW. By the way, I'm not normalizing these modes. Sometimes people in textbooks spend some time in normalizing these modes, but as you'll see, it's totally not important to have to normalize them correctly. Because, whether EW annihilates it and 10 times EW also annihilates it, to get the normalization of EW is not important for solving this problem in a vacuum. So, EW is equal to AW minus E to the minus pi W by A. Omega dagger. Okay. In the normalization we use So, EWs and EW bars have this property that the EWs and EW tilde have this property. Similarly, you can write the FWs in terms of the BWs and the BW tilde daggers. Okay. So, extension of tutorial problem. Analogous, but you should do that.
So why the normalizing factor for W theta change?
By what change? This, it just comes from solving these linear equations. You see, EW is given by what? EW is given by taking A omega dagger, which gives you EW plus EW tilde dagger. Then you have to multiply this by e to the minus pi omega by A and subtract it off. You will get an e to the pi W by A minus let's see, I hope I have got it right. I think I have got it right. So EW comes by taking AW, subtracting off minus e to the minus pi W by AW tilde dagger. This gives up this term, right? And you have e pi omega by A minus e to the minus pi omega by A this term. That's what gives you this coefficient. Then there's EW tilde. I'm just solving those linear equations, inverting them. Now you have to look at EW tilde. So that comes by taking this and by subtracting off the dagger of this. So the dagger of this is AW dagger is EW tilde plus you have an EW dagger. And then you multiply it with the One second. Let me just make sure I've got it right. Right. So you multiply it with e to the minus pi omega by a to cancel out this EW dagger term. You'll get e to minus 2 pi omega by a, which is what we have. Okay. So these asymmetries, by the way, have to do with the fact that we didn't normalize these EWs and EW tildes correctly, so that they're not physically significant for anything. It's just the fact that it's because we've chosen some normalization which is asymmetric in choosing these modes. So these denominator factors being different is not physically significant. These modes are totally symmetric footing. The asymmetry is introduced because of our choice of normalization, which was asymmetric this time. Okay, so now what does this tell us about how the Minkowski vacuum is written in terms of the Rindler modes? Okay, so if you can solve these equations. EW on the Minkowski vacuum is 0, EW tilde on the Minkowski vacuum is 0. That gives you some equations now in terms of AW and EW tilde. Using the techniques that we developed yesterday, we get our first or significant result, which is that the Minkowski vacuum is e to the minus pi w by a omega dagger a omega tilde dagger. So the solution to e omega and e omega tilde is 0, sorry. And there's a plus term which involves d omega, which I haven't written. E to the this, I don't have space on the board. Plus d terms, which are exactly the same. Okay? So is this result here? It's e to the this is all in the exponential. E to the minus pi omega by a omega dagger, a omega tilde dagger, t omega plus d terms, which are exactly the same, acting on the Rindler vacuum. Okay. So is this result clear? Okay. Now I'm going to give you the third and I think not last. Second last. So I'm giving you a number of tutorial problems, but they're all simple. Okay, so the next tutorial problem is take that expansion, okay, expand it out in terms of many particle states, in terms of the Fock space, and show that this expansion is actually the same as saying that omega Minkowski looks like some overall energy eigenstates, okay, e to the minus beta e by 2 into energy eigenstate on the left, energy eigenstate on 1, energy eigenstate in 3. Okay. What does this mean? This means, well, E1 is first. You can check that this is the same as writing e to the minus beta e by 2, where beta is equal to 2 pi by a. Okay. Huh? Oh, the b terms do contribute. Sorry. Yeah. terms contribute everywhere. The B terms are totally analogous to the A terms. If I don't write the B terms, it's because I forgot they're everywhere. And it's exactly the same. You can see how this is working out in the beginning. You see, let's expand this out to first order. In the beginning, you get the vacuum, right? So that's the eigenstate 0, 0. So let's expand it out to first order. Okay. So what does this look like? This looks like 1 plus this term, right? Plus a term which is and so you see that sorry, one second. I hope I haven't made a mistake in normalization. Sorry. I think it's okay. Okay, so you see that what happens is I write a 1, which is the first term, which is the vacuum. Okay, what's the next term? The next term involves, creating one particle of state omega, of energy omega on the left, and another particle of energy omega on the right. Right? Okay, so that's an energy eigenstate with omega, omega, and what's the term that multiplies it? E to the minus pi omega by A, which is just what we want, right? E to the minus beta E by 2. Remember, there is an E by 2. Is this clear how this is occurring at the first order? Can you see how it occurs? You expand this out to first order, you get 1 plus e to the minus pi omega by A into A omega dagger, A omega tilde dagger. This is creating an energy. It's creating a one particle state in the left, one particle state in the right, but a one particle state of energy omega. This is one particle state of energy omega. Right? Now you square it once more. You will get combinations of things, right? You will get A omega 1 into A omega 1 dagger into A omega 2 dagger. But the exponent will also add. You will get e to the minus pi omega 1 and e to the minus pi omega 2. So whenever you get some energy, you get an exponent which looks like e to the minus pi into the same energy. Pi by into the same energy. That's where this e to the minus beta E by 2 comes from. Okay? So you can check that this whole expression will sum into e to the minus beta E by 2. Of course, I haven't normalized it, but what should the correct normalization be? Actually, it shouldn't be 1 by root n factorial, it should be 1 by square root of z, where z is the partition function of the state. In this case, this partition function diverges, so you have to regulate it, of course. So, this state is, as it's written, is non-normalizable because the partition function diverges. But if you were to regulate it by putting some cutoffs, then you see that, if you take the norm of the state, what do you get? You get sum into E of e to the minus beta E. Okay? That's the partition function. So you have to put a 1 by root, this is not 1 by root 2, it's 1 by root z. Okay, so it's 1 by root z, where z is the partition function at the temperature beta. Okay. So this tells us something rather interesting. It tells us that if you look at the observer 1, just the observer in region 1, what does the state of the system look to him when you're in the Minkowski vacuum? The state of the system is what it looks like if you trace out, the region 3, right? So that is actually a mixed state. You see, this state involves, the Minkowski vacuum involves entanglement between region 1 and region 3, right? So if you take region 1 only, you have an observer who is only in region 1, and if he traces out region 3, you see that the density matrix for region 1 looks like 1 over z into e to the minus beta h. Right? So you see that if you, that's a statement that which is the same thing as the minus beta h. Okay? So you see that what we have found is something rather remarkable, which is the statement that you take the Minkowski vacuum, right? Just the Minkowski vacuum, which you might have thought is just totally boring and uninteresting. But you quantize the Minkowski vacuum in terms of observers who are accelerating on the left and the right, who use these funny Rindler modes, and it turns out that the observer in region 1, who's the observer on the right, actually thinks that the Minkowski vacuum involves a thermal bath of particles and it's exactly thermal to this person. It looks to this person that he is living in a bath, or he or she is living in a bath, which is exactly thermal, and in fact the full density matrix of the system looks like e to the minus beta h. Okay? So it's a rather remarkable result that we found using some simple manipulations, okay? And it's a very important result. Okay, so at this point I want to stop and ask if there are questions, because this is it's a kind of a central result in a lot that we do. So are there any questions about this? That's it. Okay, that will give you this. So you trace over 3. Take this density matrix and trace it over 3, and that will give you rho 1. So do a partial trace over 3 and you will get rho 1. Okay, and rho 1 is a mixed state. Omega m is a pure state, but the density matrix inside in region 1 is mixed, because 1 is entangled with 3. Yeah.
So this Unruh observer, the Unruh in which we have the frame, the properties seem to be like that of an inertial observer.
The Unruh observer, okay, it's not quite an inertial observer, but okay.
So that's what I was asking. Can you physically motivate the need for another inertial observer?
I mean, it's not. It's a trick. You know, you can take the full Minkowski modes and you can find the full Bogoliubov coefficient. It's just mathematically a much harder problem, which you wouldn't be able to do in 5 minutes. The Unruh observer is just a combination of modes that has a property that positive frequency modes go to the same positive frequency modes. It's a trick, which gets you the right answer.
What he's asking
What
he's probably asking is that the Minkowski observer and the Unruh observer are probably connected by Lorentz transformation.
The Minkowski observer and the Unruh observer are not connected by some simple Lorentz transformation, so I don't know.
No, the Reindler observer definitely is not. So that's a
yeah, so I don't think the Unruh observer and the Minkowski observer are also connected by some, they're connected by some transformation that preserves positive frequencies. Lorentz transformations do that, but I don't think the Minkowski and the Unruh observer, it's not the case that the Unruh modes are just some simple Lorentz transformation of the Minkowski. If that was the case, you would have found the full Bogoliubov transformations very easily.
There is a linear transformation.
There is a linear transformation, which is some transformation between the Minkowski and the Unruh modes, which is not just a simple Lorentz transformation.
There are two Lorentz invariants. One is the sign of energy, and another is the actual mass of the time like some geodesic. So I think here only the sign of energy.
But the sign of the energy, I mean, it's not. You shouldn't think of it in terms of Lorentz transformations. It's just a transformation that takes positive to positive frequencies, and you can use such transformations. They have the property that they take positive to positive frequencies. Without them being Lorentz transformations.
They share a common notion of time. That's what they're doing.
Well, they share a common notion of positivity of time. They don't share a common notion of time, but they share some common notion of what is positive energy.
So the spatial slices are sort of not exactly. That's sort of one way of.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's. Yeah. I don't know how to say it more precisely. I don't want to make an imprecise statement. The precise statement is that positive frequencies of one are the same as positive frequencies of the other, and so they agree on that, which doesn't mean that they are connected with a simple Lorentz transformation.
This 1 and 3 observers can't, 1 and 3 regions can't communicate classically.
That's right. Someone who's in 1 and someone who's in 3 can't. They can't communicate quantum mechanically also. Completely causal, yeah.
So if I'm naively trying to simplify what Unruh observer is, if it's not connected to the Minkowski by Lorentz transformation, the vacuum would be same. That's what we just proved.
We didn't prove that. We just proved that we proved that if you have some complicated Bogoliubov transformations in which you mix the positive and negative frequency modes, then the vacuum is not the same. That's not the statement that Lorentz transformations are the most general transformations. Lorentz transformations are a very special set of transformations which take A's of one observer to A's of the other observer. That doesn't mean they're the most general transformations that leave positive. They take positive to positive frequency and negative to negative frequency. Lorentz transformations don't exhaust that set.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, if it's not an inertial observer, it will experience a thermal bath. Is this statement correct?
No, I don't think the statement is, first of all, no. So this statement is the issue of, so, what we have proved here is something more complicated. What we have proved here is not that there is an observer, who is saying, even though we are using those words, what we have proved here is that there is a set of observers who use a particular set of modes to describe the world, which are the Reindler modes. And it's true that, the observers who are accelerating, if you have a family of observers are accelerating in a certain way, for those observers, it's natural to use these modes. Then in terms of the description of these people, because the notion of particle and so on, as we discussed, is non-local. In terms of the description of these people, it's true that it looks like there's a thermal path. That doesn't mean that there's no set of modes. You can write down sets of modes that don't have to do anything with some simple observers who are accelerating or doing something. And a set of modes involves some choice of a full choice of mode functions, which is you may be able to describe it in terms of a family of observers if you want to, although it will become very quickly a very clunky description. So it's very simple to check. You can check that you can write down transformations between negative to negative frequency, and Lorentz transformations don't exhaust that set.
His statement that if the observer is not inertial with respect to the state of the observer, anywhere he will see a phenomenon.
No, that's not, as I said, the issue of what an observer, the issue of who is using Unruh modes involves making a choice of a mode function all over space. So you're making some mode function all over space, and that is, this is not something which is difficult to check. We don't have to use arguments of this kind which are all imprecise. So we shouldn't trust, it's something very simple to check. Take U of omega. What are the Bogoliubov coefficients? The Bogoliubov coefficients look like u to the minus I omega by A into e to the I omega t. Okay. So this gives you some Bogoliubov coefficients, which actually are some gamma functions. You can take these and you can do, you'll get some Bogoliubov coefficients. You can do this integral. Mathematica will do the integral for you. You'll get some gamma functions. Okay. That's different from what you would get if you did some simple Lorentz transform. This is not what you would get just by doing some moves.
So this Unruh coordinate.
You can see, these are the. I hope I got the sign right. U to the minus I omega by A, and you want e to the plus I omega t. Yeah. So you can use these to get the you can do this Fourier transform to get the write the Unruh modes in terms of yeah.
These Unruh coordinate systems can be generated to other spacetimes, or is it specific for Minkowski?
There's no Unruh coordinate. This is a trick which is used. There's no coordinate system we described that went along with this. We just said there's a linear combination of modes and has the property that that linear combination shares a positive frequency origin with with the Minkowski mode. It's a very special trick that has to do with a very special form of the Minkowski and Ritter things. It's not something that you would use in. Maybe you can generalize it in some sense to some other setting. It's some special trick that exists for a simple setting, which shows that that these combinations.
In general, there would be observers who have positive frequency modes, but are not so easily connected, like Lorentz connected or.
All we said, by the way, in these was that you want some function of x and t which has the property it's analytic in the lower half plane. There are many such functions of x and t you can write down, which are not simple Lorentz transformations of one another. So we shouldn't. There's no reason that it's true that Lorentz transformed observers agree on notions of positive frequency. It doesn't mean that all observers who agree on notions of positive frequency are Lorentz transformed observers. So Lorentz transformations involve first of all. Yeah.
As you said, an accelerated observer uses Rindal modes to describe the world, and he will see
family of accelerated observers. Yeah.
Yes, and he will see Minkowski vacuum as a thermal bath, right? So how do we decide this is an accelerated observer?
How do we decide what?
This is an accelerated observer. This is a relative thing, right?
Oh, good. So far you're right that I haven't made precise the statement that an accelerated observer will see a thermal bath. If you want to ask that question of whether what an individual observer will see, you have to do something slightly different. You have to look at something called an Unruh detector, which involves basically taking the field and coupling it to some particle detector. It involves writing down the physical notion of a particle detector, and then getting the observer to work to live along a certain world line, and you can ask what that particle detector will generate. So far what we've said is something different, because we are not actually interested in individual observers moving along world lines. What we are saying is that if you have two families of observers, one of them uses a certain set of modes and the other uses another set of modes, then the description in one family is related to the description in the other family by this.
So I just want to get back to this question again, because this is basically showing that it's not related by Lorentz transformation. Nobody is saying anything. the statement that a non-inertial observer will see a normal bar. Why is that a controversial thing? I mean, the observer will have a particle horizon.
Well, that's not, the non-inertial observer doesn't, what does that mean? It means anyone who's, the set of, a non-inertial observer is is someone who can be doing anything. So a non-inertial observer, is somebody who could be, a non-inertial observer doesn't have to be someone who's accelerating with constant acceleration. Second, it's not the case that the Unruh modes are associated in some simple way to observers. I think that is very important. Maybe one thing I should emphasize is that it's not such a good thing to think in terms of, although it's something that is done often, to think of modes as being associated with individual observers. Modes are not associated with individual observers. This is one of the points that we've been trying to make. Modes are associated, a mode is something which is a non-local description. There's no sense in which one observer moving along a given world line uses a certain mode. A mode has to do with the behavior of a wave function over all of space, so it's something very non-local. There may be a sense in which an entire family of observers finds it convenient to use a certain mode, but there's certainly no sense in which given one observer's world line, you can talk about the modes that are appropriate for that observer. There's no meaning of that. And because a world line is some one parameter family in all of space-time. A mode is something that extends on all of space. So mode is not associated to an observer. A mode may be associated to a family of observers. So you may be able to construct, I don't know how that's done, maybe one can think of it, you may be able to construct a family of observers who decides to use, for some reason, the modes that are natural to the, who decides to use the Unruh modes. Even a family of observers may decide to use, one set of modes or another set of modes. It's a question of choice, as we've been saying. Okay? But you may be able to find a family of observers who's able to use, the Unruh set of modes. And what we're saying is that this family of observers, if they use the Unruh modes, will agree on the notion of Minkowski vacuum. What the different observers in this family will be doing is something which is complicated, which I don't know the answer to offhand. I don't know how to construct such a family, but you may be able to construct some complicated family of observers that finds it convenient to use this set of modes. But I don't know what.
It won't necessarily be thermal in the simple way. It won't give you like a.
What would be thermal in simple way?
I mean, here we can, for all these, the entire family of observers, I can say that there is a temperature beta.
For which family of observers?
So relating the two vacuums.
Yes.
Right?
So that's a statement that the quantization. If you look at it's a statement about state. It's a statement about which I raised. It's a statement that the Minkowski vacuum can be written in terms of an excited state of the Rindler vacuum, and the density matrix, if you trace out 3 of 1 is given by e to the minus beta. This is not a statement. It's a statement about what the world is as seen by a set of observers who decide to use the Rindler modes.
And while setting this mode function, we use one for region 3 and one for region 1.
Right.
They can't even communicate with each other.
The region 1, region 3 people can't communicate with that. That's
so
right.
I think if a set of observers have to agree on that, I think.
But we agree on what?
On which mode function to use.
But they don't. The region 1 and region 3 observers don't have to agree on one another. What the statement here is that you look at a set of observers who are in region 1, who are using some set of modes. To that set of observers, the world looks like a density matrix once you've traced out region 3. You don't even have to be interested in what basis you've traced out region 3. If you have observers who are on a particular basis in region 1, a particular basis in region 3, they see a particular form of the entanglement. If the observers in region 3 decided to use some other set of modes, the observers in region 1 wouldn't even care about that in terms of the density matrix that they saw.
There is a Minkowski vacuum, there is a regular observer, which sees a thermal bath with some temperature. And now,
we haven't made that statement. That is a statement which is correct, but that's not the statement we've made here. We've made a statement about families of observers, not about individual observers. We'll go on. Yeah.
Now, what I'm saying is that similarly for Rindler vacuum, the Minkowski observer will see similar kind of thermal
Yes.
bath.
So Rindler vacuum. Actually, the Rindler vacuum is a rather funny state in the Minkowski space. Yeah, you can check that.
And will the temperature be equal?
No. The Rindler vacuum, I think, so Rindler vacuum is something very funny. It's a good question, but the Rindler vacuum is a state which is actually irregular at the horizon. It has infinite energy density at the horizon. So Rindler vacuum is a state which has these firewalls circling at the horizon. So the Rindler vacuum is a state of this kind. So it's not a simple thermal bath in the Minkowski vacuum, but it's a state that's irregular across these horizons. So it has these very crazy correlators across the horizon. So if you look at the Rindler vacuum and you compute correlation functions of the field phi here and phi here across these things, they have a very bad form. So the correct description of the Rindler vacuum is in terms of some singularities at these points.
But there again, a freely falling observer should see like a.
In the Rindler vacuum, a freely falling observer doesn't. Freely falling observer in the Minkowski space doesn't see something.
Freely falling observer in, suppose you have a horizon and you're falling across the horizon.
Yeah, so in the Rindler vacuum it doesn't. The Rindler vacuum is not the vacuum that's appropriate for a freely falling observer. In the Rindler vacuum, an observer who crosses this sees a fireball. So I mean, this is a good question. It anticipates some of the things we might say. The Rindler vacuum is not is not a good state in the Minkowski space. It has bad correlators across the horizon. So in the Rindler vacuum, someone who's crossing the horizon doesn't see something. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, very good. So, going to say something about region 2. Let me just give you the result. Okay. In region 2, just to complete, we said something about region 1 and region 3. Someone asked, many people asked, and it's a good question. What happens in region 2? Okay, what about the forward region? So once you have these Unruh modes continue nicely into the forward region, right? So you can take the expansion that we have in terms of the Unruh modes. Right? The Rindler modes, initial Rindler expansion we had was an expansion that was valid only for region 1 and for region 3. The Rindler modes were not defined in region 2. But these U to the I omega modes, these Unruh modes are defined in region 1, 2, 3 and 4. They are defined because it's just U. It's something that's given in terms of the Minkowski variables. You can easily continue it. You know the branch cut structure. So you can check. I won't do it in detail because I'm running out of time, but let me just give you the result. And it's a simple check. You can check first of all that in region 2, the relation is U is equal to e to the minus a UR, B is equal to e to a VR, du dv is e to the twice exr dxr squared in the sign conventions we have been using so far. This tells you that xr becomes time in region 2. Okay, the time-like coordinate is xr. Now, what's the reason for that? Look at this figure. And I'm going to draw the same figure again. The time-like coordinate is xr because remember lines of constant xr, lines of constant uv, right? Products of u. So lines of constant xr are this. Okay. And this is for region 4 as well. But in region 2, lines of constant xr are just this. Yeah, hyperbolas. These hyperbolas are space-like. Okay. So xr becomes the time coordinate, and you can check from that explicit calculation of the metric that xr becomes the time coordinate here. And you can check that if you do this expansion, you will find, if you take the Unruh modes and it's in the notes as well. Actually, it's in the notes also, you can check. If you look at the notes, you'll see it. You will find that phi 2 okay, this is one point where the A's and the B's behave differently. Okay, so it's one point where I'm going to point out the A's and the B's behave differently. Okay. Remember that VR is TR plus XR, so this is in e to the minus omega XR, and this is TR minus XR, so this is also e to the minus I omega XR. Okay, so both these exponents have an e to the minus I omega XR. Right? Which is correct because XR is the origin of time. But notice that something funny has happened. Okay, and this is another important physical point which I want to make. Not all the, we had an A, B, A tilde and B tilde modes. Okay, not all these modes enter into region 2. Okay? Which are the modes which enter into region The modes which enter into region 2 are the left movers from region 1. Okay? They are the modes that are regular at the Rindler horizon here, the future horizon, and the right movers from region 3. Okay? So if you this expansion just comes by taking the Unruh modes and doing the substitution, it's in the notes. Okay, so what happens is that the left movers from region 1, which is the B modes, and the right movers from region 3. Okay? So, and that's kind of intuitive. You know, the modes which are moving to the left from region 1 get into the horizon because they're moving to the left. Modes which are moving to the right enter the horizon. The modes which are moving to the right from here never enter this particle horizon. Okay? So sometimes you will see an expansion of these region 2 in terms of all sorts of modes. You know, you can take all of these E and E tilde and F tilde modes that we had, and it will look like there are 4 different kinds of modes, but there are not. There are only 2 different kinds of modes inside. And these 2 different kinds of modes have to do with the left movers that come from region 1 and the right movers that come from region 3. Okay, this is an important point which is usually not emphasized in textbooks, so it's important to get this point. It follows from simple algebra from what we've done, and it's in the notes. But the result is simple, and you should follow that, which is that B modes are regular at the future horizon from this side, so they enter. The A tilde modes are regular at this horizon from this side, and therefore they enter. The other modes can't enter. Okay, the A modes and the B tilde modes do not manage to enter into region 2. And in 4 it's the opposite. Okay? In 4 it's the A and the B tilde modes that enter, and these guys don't enter. Okay, very good. So, good. This concludes our discussion of the Rindler quantization of Minkowski vacuum. I'm now going to move on to a derivation of
So where does this then show the divergent correlations? Can we see it from this?
This does not. There's all in. This doesn't show any divergent correlation.
Yeah. So just using this, is there an argument that can be made?
Oh, yeah. Using this, there's an argument that can be made. It has to do with the entanglement of the B's and the B tilde correlators. You can take this correlator here and maybe tomorrow I'll show you this. It's not hard to show, but maybe tomorrow we can take this computation. Actually, not 8 tilde as it is. Well, maybe tomorrow. No, it's not worth doing it right now. It's something maybe tomorrow we can check this back. The Rindler vacuum is LTA. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go to the Hawking radiation part. Okay. So we spent a lot of time, in fact, on this Minkowski and Rindler, but it turns out that this is actually very useful for actual black holes for a reason that I'll mention. So as I said, I'm going to try and give you 2 slightly imprecise derivations of Hawking radiation, and then I'll try and make them precise at the end of tomorrow's lecture. So the first derivation, uses the analogy of a black hole horizon with the Rindler horizon. You see, in Rindler space as well, we had a horizon. It was a bit of a fake horizon because it was a horizon for an observer. But the Schwarzschild observer is also an observer who, by the principle of equivalence, is accelerating. So if you think of the family of observers who are sitting at constant r, these family of observers, remember in the Kruskal UV plane, were observers of the kind who are living at UV equals constant, which is similar to what the Rindler observers are doing, who are living in the Minkowski plane and UV equals constant. Okay? And remember that if you have a very big black hole, or if you're looking at frequencies which have the property that the wavelengths are very short compared to the curvature scale of the black hole, then in the Kruskal coordinates, the black hole looks locally, not only locally for some region, it looks like it's flat space. The black hole horizon looks like you're in flat space. And the transformation between the set of modes that's appropriate for an infalling observer and the set of modes that's appropriate for a Schwarzschild observer is the transformation between Minkowski and Schwarzschild space. Between Minkowski and Rindler modes. Okay? So is the physics of this clear? Let me just try and make the physics of this clear. You see, we had a classical solution for the Schwarzschild black hole. The classical solution for the Schwarzschild black hole told us that if you look at late time, the horizon is a region which is locally very flat and looks a lot like flat space. Okay. Therefore, if this is the case, and if the horizon is supposed to look like it's flat, then the infalling observer, some observer who falls in, some observer who's freely falling, thinks that this observer is basically living in flat space. Is this clear? If some observer is freely falling, even as this observer crosses the horizon, this observer doesn't know that he or she has crossed the horizon, which is a global property. What this observer thinks is that we are living in flat space. This is the statement that we could be crossing a horizon right now. So if there is, us and some set of friends that we have who use some set of modes to describe the world, then all of us are used a set of modes that look a lot like the Minkowski modes. Now there is another family of observers who are the family of observers who are living at constant r. To live at constant r, you have to accelerate in the Schwarzschild. You have to accelerate because there is a gravitational field of the black hole which is trying to pull you in. So there is a set of observers who are living at constant r, who are the Schwarzschild observers, right, who are the observers who are accelerating. These observers include the observer who is sitting at infinity at constant r. Right, that observer is also trying to sit at constant r. He is not falling in. Therefore, he is also accelerating. Whereas there are freely falling observers who are just falling through, who like to use modes which are like the Minkowski modes. So, more precisely, the modes that the freely falling observers should use are the Kruskal modes, which are the modes which are appropriate in the Kruskal coordinate system, and the modes that the Schwarzschild observers should use are the Schwarzschild modes. But for a big black hole, the Kruskal modes are a lot like the Minkowski modes. Therefore, if you look at a setup in which the horizon is smooth and in which things look like the vacuum for the infalling observer, then, and if you believe that that is the physical state of the black hole, which is what is suggested by the classical solution, then you find that this solution, which looks like the vacuum for the infalling observer and for his friends who are using Minkowski modes, looks like a thermal state for the outside Schwarzschild observer. Okay, so that's because look, the transformation of coordinates looks the same as the transformation from Minkowski to Rindler, as I will now show in a minute. Is the broad plan of the argument clear? Okay. Maybe I'll give you some more details, and then you can determine once more. You see, the key point is, let's try and write down the wave equation. Okay, let's try and write down the wave equation for the observer who's living in Schwarzschild space. Okay, let's say a wave. You have some particle which is propagating. You have del phi equal to 0. Okay. Now, what does this wave equation look like? You can check. Remember the metric was. I'll just go back to a Schwarzschild black hole. Not a transverse black hole. Everything. The Schwarzschild black hole is good for everything you want. So what does the wave equation look like? And this, by the way, you can write as one. It's convenient to use these tortoise coordinates to write this one. So in field theory and GR we use different time conventions. Use the field theory conventions. So you have this is the metric. So what's the wave equation? So let's see, look at the wave equation. First of all, what's root of minus d? What's root minus d? See, root of minus d gives you a factor of 1 minus twice m by r if you compute the determinant. There's square root, and that gives you an r, right? So you get r minus 2m. Okay. Second, there's a g mu factor which comes from here. So there's a g r star, which is 1 by 1 minus 2m by r. Okay. So notice that root of minus g. What?
It's square root of plus.
I still spell to minus j because there are 3 negative signs. So it's so this is for GTT and GRR are 1 by 1 minus twice m by r. Okay? So notice that this guy is going to 0 at the horizon and this guy is going to 1 at this guy is going to infinity at the horizon. Okay? So if you look at the solutions to the wave equation, first of all if you look at solutions to the wave equation in near horizon region, they actually simplify. They simplify it means minus sign. That's it. Yeah. So in the near horizon region, so in the near horizon region, you see the wave equation becomes d by dt squared minus d by dr star squared on phi is equal to 0. Okay. Regardless, this is an important fact. Regardless of mass, interactions, angular momentum. Okay. So in the near horizon, this is the wave equation, and that's it. You don't care about what interactions you have. Even if I didn't take box phi is equal to 0, where to box phi is equal to some v of phi, that additional term would get completely swamped out. Okay. Let's say I took this equation. Remember that box is 1 by square root of minus g mu square root of minus g mu, right? Okay, so notice that square root of minus g is going to 0. Okay. Therefore, if you let box phi is equal to v phi, the square root of minus g will go here, will kill this v of phi. Okay. And it will kill all terms except terms where the 0 of the square root of minus g is compensated by an infinity in the g mu nu, which are only the terms which have a g r star star and a g tt. Okay. So you don't care about the motion in the angular momentum plane, you don't care about anything except for these parts, and these are the only two terms that remain, and all the mass and so on doesn't matter. Any field, whatever it's interacting, whatever it's doing, behaves like this in the near horizon. Okay? So the wave function simplifies a lot. What are the solutions to this? Solutions to this are, of course, phi is equal to the I omega t minus r star to the I omega t plus r star. Right? Okay. Now, let's look at another set of mode functions. So this is one set of mode functions. Okay. But remember, yeah, solutions for both positive and negative. So you can write down a quantization, that should be done a quantization please. And then there are other terms, as the behavior on the sphere. And this m doesn't enter into this. Okay. And this is near horizon. If you go away from the horizon, then the modes are more complicated, but this is the near horizon. Okay. Okay. Now we are interested in another expansion. Remember, we defined these Kruskal coordinates.
This expansion is already approximate, right?
It's exact in the near horizon. It's only approximated that it's valid in the near horizon. I mean, you can write down a full wave function here which would not have this simple form. Now, remember we wrote down these other coordinates, which look like u is equal to minus e to the okay. Remember we had these Kruskal coordinates, uk and vk. And in terms of, actually let me put the one of for them also. Anyway, okay, we have this coordinate. And in terms of these coordinates, uk and vk, the metric looked like it was flat space. Remember? Just some 32n cube, but some number. Doesn't matter what the number is. And in terms of these things, it looked like du. Okay, but this is a constant. It's in your notes. It's some 32 m cubed by whatever. But in the near horizon region, it's some constant into du dv, into just a flat metric, right? So there is an infalling observer who may decide to use, the coordinates in which the metric looks locally flat, and therefore there is another observer who will use a different basis, which is phi Kruskal, which is d omega into into again ym of omega d omega by square root omega, right? So there is another observer who is the Kruskal observer who uses d omega into e to the I omega uk plus d omega into e to the minus I omega vk into something on the sphere into d omega by omega, right?
These omega uk and vk are null. So
That's right.
there is no question of positive frequency or negative frequency.
There is, because uk and vk are null, but that's just a statement that the way you have an ek minus there's a term which looks like an ek t Kruskal minus s. So there is a question of positive and negative frequency. I've just written that ek minus xk, ek plus xk combinations this way. Okay. This observer, by the way, also doesn't care about what this m is. This m doesn't enter into this. Okay, because this term that's here is not u square minus v square or something like that, or it's not u minus v square. Okay, so some r square which in the near horizon region is disconnected from what u means. So physics is looking effectively two-dimensional. Okay, so physics effectively looks two-dimensional in the near horizon region. So this is one important fact. So we have two important facts. Okay, one of them is that second, this transformation of coordinates that we had was exactly like the transformation of coordinates from Minkowski to Rindler. Remember? Right? Okay, so are these 2 points clear? We are almost at the end. Actually, we have almost completed what we are about to say. Are these 2 points clear? Right? You see, this is the same transformation we had, right? We had this e to the minus a ur, e to the minus b ur between Minkowski and Rindler, which is what we have for the Kruskal to Schwarzschild as well. Okay? And then, so therefore, the Bogoliubov transformations you might have thought between this t and the d's and these a's and these b's are the same. Okay? Now, first, to complete the Bogoliubov transformations, you have to introduce another Schwarzschild patch in the region behind the horizon and expand the field there as well. Okay? But therefore, using this and using our results from Rindler, Now I'm going to make a slightly subtle point. I'll write down the result and then I'll explain what this is. The omega falling vacuum looks like thermal bar which is the statement that the omega infalling vacuum looks like, in terms of the A vacuum, it looks like where did this come from? This came from noticing that this A factor that we had, is 1 over 4m. Right? A factor we had is 1 over 4m. The factor that we got here was pi omega by A, right, which is 4 pi m, which is the same as beta by 2. So beta is 8 pi m. Okay? So from the previous two results I had written, is it clear how this follows? There's a slightly subtle point which I'm about to make. But is it clear to first order how this follows? Because the change of coordinates is the same locally, we believe that the Bogoliubov transformation should also be the same, and that lets us motivate this expression. Okay? But there's something here which some of you asked before. This, by the way, doesn't tell us that there's a thermal bath also for the B's. Okay? Why doesn't it tell us that there's a thermal bath also for the B's? That's because we demanded that the horizon is smooth for the infalling observer, okay? Not for the So when we did the full Minkowski to Rindler transition, it's a slightly subtle point which I'll make in more detail tomorrow. We assumed that the full space, was the Minkowski vacuum. That meant both the past and the future horizons were smooth. Here, the physical assumption we are entitled to make for a collapsing shell of matter, not for an eternal black hole, but for a collapsing shell of matter, is that the future horizon is smooth, but the past horizon actually doesn't even exist. Okay? Therefore, the modes that are excited are the right moving modes, the outgoing modes at the horizon of the Schwarzschild black hole. Okay? These modes, the d omega modes, are the Rindler left movers. They are the ingoing modes at the particle horizon. The ingoing modes are not in a thermal bath for a Schwarzschild black hole formed from collapse, but the outgoing modes are in a thermal bath. And that's because the physical assumption we made was that the space looks smooth for an infalling observer. This may not be totally clear from the derivation I just gave, which will become clear tomorrow. But this basically brings us, to the end of the simplest derivation you can get of Hawking radiation. And let me just take a step back and review, and then I'll stop. You see, what we said was we had this result for Rindler to Minkowski space. Then we looked at the wave function, and in Schwarzschild coordinates we expanded it. We had some expansion. There's a coordinate transformation to another set of coordinates which are appropriate for the infalling observer. In that coordinate transformation, the wave function has another set of modes. Of course, you can write down the full mode, and you can try to find the Bogoliubov transformation between the full mode in one system and the other system. But we don't need to do that, because locally this coordinate transformation, at least in the near horizon region, looks a lot like the coordinate transformation from Minkowski to Rindler. And therefore, we use the fact that the Bogoliubov coefficients must therefore be the same as they were in the Minkowski to Rindler case, and that allows us to write down this expansion. Okay, What are the weak points of this? The weak points are clearly, first of all, we've made these near horizon approximations. So this is not telling us, giving us a clear sense of what the validity of these results is. It's not telling us what happens if we had interactions, how these results are corrected. So for that we would have to do a full mode expansion, which we haven't done here. So it's not telling us about that. Secondly, this point, which is the point about which set of modes is excited, and it's only the outgoing modes which are excited, not the ingoing modes, is also a slightly subtle point which is not absolutely clear from the derivation that we did right now, but it will become clear tomorrow. But apart from that, this captures the general physics of Hawking radiation, which is the things locally look like, the Schwarzschild horizon locally looks like a Riddler horizon. And therefore, just like the set of Riddler observers sees a thermal path, the set of Schwarzschild observers also sees a thermal path. Okay. So this is a rather central result in this whole field of quantum theory in black hole backgrounds. And as you can see, it's not very difficult to derive once you've figured out the derivation of the Unruh effect. And we've in this lecture managed to derive this rather central and it's a very important result in physics of black holes. Okay, so I'll stop here, but if there are any questions.